spins the web tonight, 'cause we're all in the mood for a hero now, and there's evil doers to fight.
Greetings, webheads, and welcome back to Unrepentant Geeking, the show where a geek can be a geek. As always, I am your host, Sean Cronenfeld, and today we've got something special for all of you. The legendary, spoken of in whispers, but actually does exist, Patreon request. Yeah, okay. I'm basically reviewing something at the request of a loyal Patreon who pledged at the $20 level, and so he now gets to inflict unimaginable pain on me, as you will all see, and no doubt laugh at, because you're monsters! You're all monsters! But I love you anyways. Seriously though, today I'm going to be taking a look at what has to be in the running for the worst Spider-Man story ever written. Now, there have been quite a number of stories over the years that people might say qualifies for that dubious honor, and most hardcore comic fans these days will probably name One More Day as the worst Spider-Man story ever. And I certainly won't disagree that it's one of the most destructive Spider-Man stories ever, that it did a lot of damage to the character, not just because it undid the marriage of Mary Jane and Peter Parker, but because of how it undid the marriage and all that stuff. And look, if you want thoughts on One More Day, Linkara has already gone into great detail on why it is awful, and I can't really top what he did there, and that's not my job. But anyways, but I would argue, as awful as One More Day is, Sins Past may be worse. True, it didn't do as much long-term damage as One More Day has, but just in terms of being a story and the sheer level of, it burns, I think Sins Past has One More Day beat, as I will demonstrate now. So, without any further ado, let's dig into Amazing Spider-Man Sins Past. Here we go. Okay, but before we can dig into the disaster piece itself, first, let's talk about the man largely responsible for it, Joseph Michael Straczynski, a.k.a. J. Michael Straczynski, as he's known professionally, a.k.a. JMS. JMS is a creator who goes way back. He began his professional year in 1979, the same year I was born. Ugh, I bet that makes us both feel old. Got his start in animation, working on such shows as He-Man and Masters of the Universe, She-Ra, Princess's Power, Jason the Wheeled Warriors, only to get his real first big break with a show that has always been near and dear to my heart, The Real Ghostbusters. He helped break the first 78 episodes of the show, and he wrote many of the series' best episodes, including Slimer Come Home, Mr. Sandman Dream Me a Dream, Citizen Ghost, When Halloween Was Forever, Xmas Marks the Spot, Chicken He Clucked, Who Are You Calling Two-Dimensional, and one of my all-time favorite episodes of the show, Ragnarok and Roll. Following that, he would then go and spend some time for the next several years working on live-action series, including everything from The Twilight Zone to Walker, Texas Ranger to Murder, She Wrote. So he'd had a pretty diverse career by that point, and then he would go on in 1991 to produce, create, write, basically run, and just be the overall master of Babylon 5, the project, of course, that he is probably most well known for to this day. It went on for 5 seasons, and basically helped shape science fiction television going forward. I don't think it's unfair to say that, and it remains a great show. Yeah, the special effects haven't aged great, but then again, it was always a bit low budget to begin with, and you don't judge a series like this on its effects. It's still very watchable. The show still definitely holds up, so, and if you've never seen it, by all means, go see Babylon 5 once you're done watching this video. No, really, it's just one of the seminal works of science fiction. Period. Stop. Go watch it. Well, actually, don't stop. Keep watching this, but then go watch that. Okay. So, he worked in television, he worked in film, Basically, he had a long and varied career until 2001, after having done several years of his own work, including Rising Stars for Top Cow/Image Comics. He went to Marvel to write The Amazing Spider-Man. And at the time, this was a big deal. A huge deal, really. Straczynski's run on Spider-Man came at an interesting point in time for both the character and for Marvel Comics as a whole. Marvel was still shaking off the final dregs of their troubled 90s, both financially and creatively, with Joe Quesada about a year into his now famous, or infamous, depending on who you talk to, tenure as Marvel's editor-in-chief. Quesada had a major problem on his hands at the time, namely what to do about the company's unquestionable flagship character, Spider-Man. As of the opening months of 2001, the character had certainly seen better days. Coming off of the controversial and troubled, to say the very least, Clone Saga, longtime Marvel stalwart Howard Mackie was given the job of writing Amazing Spider-Man as the book relaunched with a new #1 and a decidedly backwards-looking take on the character. This included bringing back from the dead Aunt May, despite major fan complaint, and the apparent killing off of then Spider-Man wife Mary Jane Watson, in an attempt to move Peter back to the way the character was in his younger single days. Now why does that sound familiar? The problem with this particular approach, of course, was that A, it's kind of hard to have a non-mopey Peter who wants to go out on dates and have a good time when he's, mourning the death of his wife. And B, Mary Jane was a popular enough character in her own right that killing her drove many fans away from the book screaming, appropriately enough, bloody murder. Combined with other blunders such as cramming the Ultra Mary Sue that was the new, and ultimately very temporary, Spider-Woman Maddie Franklin down readers' throats. Just don't ask. She's better off forgotten, trust me. And the other nonsense that would end up being John Byrne's attempt to retcon Peter's past, aka Spider-Man Chapter 1, and oh god, I hope Linkara tackles that disaster someday, and you had a situation ripe for some fresh blood to come in and shake things up. Enter J. Michael Straczynski. Before leaving the book as of issue 29, Howard Mackie had revealed that MJ's death had been faked as part of an eye-rollingly convoluted, nonsensical conspiracy, but also clumsily wrote MJ into deciding to leave Peter and go live on her own in Los Angeles while further pursuing her then mostly dormant acting career. This was not a popular choice with the general readership. Oh, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, aren't I? But to his credit, JMS didn't just hand-wave away MJ and Peter's problems when he took over the book. Instead, he would spend nearly 2 years working towards the couple's reconciliation in Amazing Spider-Man 50. Funnily enough, JMS actually fought tooth and nail to get Peter and MJ back together behind the scenes, a fact that tends to be forgotten about following the dross that was One More Day. This slow, meticulous plotting would be a hallmark of Straczynski's time on Amazing Spider-Man, at least until the event comic Civil War and its cataclysmic effect on Peter and his supporting cast. After Civil War, it was all downhill for JMS Amazing Spider-Man, but until then, with the one notable exception we are going to be digging into soon, not a bad story in the bunch, in my opinion. Which is not to say that every issue up until that point was vital, can't-miss, never-before-seen comic booking, but there's nothing wrong with a well-told, one-and-done superhero story from a writer and an artist at the top of their respective games. And when Straczynski did choose to go big or stretch out a story over multiple issues, he tended to do so with a naturalness that made it look easy. Indeed, despite JMS being responsible, if only partly in one case, for 2 of the worst Spider-Man stories ever produced, he still remains one of my favorite writers in the entire history of the character. This is especially true of the first half of his 6-year run on the book, when he worked exclusively with artist John Romita Jr., who, for my money, is also one of the best artists to ever draw the webhead as well. Romita was always especially well-suited for street-level superheroes, as the equally seminal Daredevil Man Without Fear proved, and he brought his all to a time on Spider-Man that would run the gamut from Peter dealing with life as a high school science teacher in a lower-income neighborhood, to taking on Dr. Octopus and a new foe out in Los Angeles, to even dealing with cosmic threats like the perennial Doctor Strange foe, the Dread Dormammu, and a series of increasingly dangerous, monstrous entities tied into the very power that made Peter amazing in the first place. Speaking of which, I guess I would be remiss if I did not at least mention the element of JMS's run that remained his most controversial addition to Spider-Man lore, at least until the story we're still going to be talking about, whether I like it or not, all too soon came along. I am of course referring to the whole Spider Totem thing, And I know it's popular these days to rag on it, but, well, I liked it then, and I still like it now. For those not familiar with what I'm talking about, the spider totem was a concept introduced by JMS at the beginning of his run, where it was suggested that Peter's abilities may have stemmed, at least in part, from a supernatural source. Basically, there is a spider god out in the ether of the Marvel Universe, and in fact, Peter is not the first person to gain spider-like powers, as demonstrated by the introduction of Ezekiel, an older man, not so coincidentally, close to the age Uncle Ben was when he died, who has spider powers, but has used them to make himself a wealthy businessman. Ezekiel would go on to explain to Peter that it was no accident that so many of Peter's foes drew, however loosely, upon animals, the vulture, rhino, chameleon, Dr. Octopus, tarantula, the lizard, etc., or totem-like ideas, Kraven the Hunter, Green Goblin, Venom, again, etc., for inspiration. Essentially, the idea was that the spider that bit Peter might have been special even before it was irradiated, and that by taking up the identity of a spider himself, Peter had inadvertently tied himself into something ancient and very dangerous. Which is a heady concept, to be sure, but what a lot of people either forget or outright ignore was that JMS was very careful not to come out and say that any of this was definitely 100% true. Oh, the spider totem definitely existed, but Peter himself, for example, repeatedly rejected the notion that that was the source of his power. And while he did soon find himself the target of a series of mystical entities, JMS gave himself an out by also having Peter come into contact with the spider totem by accident during a sort of team-up with Doctor Strange. Straczynski also made it absolutely clear that whatever the spider that Peter had been bitten by was before the accident, it was very much changed as a result of the radiation. Even more importantly, it was firmly established several times throughout the run it was still an accident that Peter was bitten and given powers that day, and not the culmination of, say, some grand long-in-the-offing destiny. Very much a in the right place at the right time, or wrong time as it were, kind of affair in other words. And so, throughout the first 3 years of his run, JMS left plenty of room for other writers to ignore the whole spider totem idea once he left the book. He even said as much in an interview at the time, explaining how he wasn't trying to redefine the core of what made Peter a hero, but simply explore an interesting concept that had struck his fancy. He was respecting what had come before, while still moving forward with the character. The reason I've gone into such detail on all this and taken so much time before getting into the review proper is because I think it's vital to understanding just how and why Sins Past failed so badly. JMS's first 3 years on Amazing Spider-Man with Romita Jr. were thoughtful and well planned out. Unlike the writers who preceded him, JMS clearly wasn't just making it up as he went along, and instead, he and Romita generally produced 1 to 2 issue stories that featured a main plot which drove most of the action, along with various longer-running subplots that would weave in and out of a given issue or story as necessary. Essentially, they were following a formula that wouldn't have felt out of place on, say, an hour-long television drama, which only makes sense given Straczynski's already discussed extensive background in writing for TV series. It was an approach also equally well-suited for a serialized monthly comic book, and by the time of Romita's last issue of Amazing Spider-Man, number 508 to be exact, and yes, the numbering did jump from the 50s to the 500s because that's just how modern superhero comic books sadly work these days, it seemed like nothing could derail JMS's already even then seminal run on the character. And then we got Sins Past. Which means that at long last, it's time to, as my colleague Linkara would say, dig into this horrific abomination of a storyline and highlight just how everything went so very wrong indeed. We begin things with generic Spider-Man cover number 2522. Which is not a knock on artist Mike Dioda's work, so much as it is a comment on how nondescript most Marvel covers were from this time. Regardless, it's a perfectly fine shot of Spidey in mid-action, with Deodato twisting our heroes' bodies in a way no normal person would be capable of in order to create a more dynamic image. Beyond that, it's not a memorable cover, but we have so many other problems yet to come, I'm prepared to let a slightly boring cover slide. Honestly, if the rest of Sins Past were merely as standard and overly familiar as this cover, as opposed to awful and soul-rending, I probably wouldn't be covering it in the first place, and oh, what a wonderful world that would be. Sadly, we're stuck in this one. While we're on the subject of Deoda's art, I should say that while I don't think he was as perfect of a fit for Spidey as Romita was, he still did decent work throughout his entire time on the book. The problems with this storyline in particular spring from bad character decisions and sloppy writing, and not from anything particularly on the artistic end. Anyways, on to the issue proper, where we open with a 6-page sequence focusing on Mary Jane and the then ongoing subplot of her acting career. Previous to this issue, MJ had walked away from parts in big-budget Hollywood films that really just wanted her for her body and nothing else, in favor of attempting a stage career where she hoped to be able to grow as an actual actress. And so, we get to see MJ audition for just such a part, only to have her receive a critique and advice from the director that ultimately wins her the role. The way JMS writes this whole sequence is fine, if fairly basic. He tries to spin the advice MJ gets as some sort of revelatory moment, when really it's just the kind of basic method acting talk any freshman drama major would receive, but whatever. The sequence is really here to let Deodato get his feet wet with some character work before diving into the main event, but it is nice to see MJ get some time, however brief, to shine her on her own without Peter really being involved. After this, we cut to the home of May Parker, who at this point has discovered Peter's secret identity and more or less come to terms with it, where she, Peter, and MJ are celebrating before a strange letter that arrived in the mail that day interrupts the good times. The sender of said letter? None other than Gwen Stacy, and boom! Just like that, the first twinges of unease should be beginning to creep into the heart and soul of anyone reading this comic. Remember, this was almost a decade before the current, for lack of a better term, Gwenaissance. Sorry, but not sorry. And at the time, invoking the name of the dearly departed Miss Stacy had become shorthand for Spider-Man writers embarking on storylines that would ultimately prove themselves bad ideas. And you can be sure, since past was no exception. As for the letter itself, it's basically the start of a long-winded apology, written in a font that makes it harder to read than necessary, no less, to Peter, written shortly before Gwen's death while she was hanging about in Europe. What exactly she was apologizing for, we don't find out, because we then cut to Peter standing outside, doing what he does best, brooding and moping. Oh, believe you me, Peter is an Olympic-level brooder/moper who could give characters like Batman and Angel, the vampire, not the mutant, a run for their money when it comes to this. Anyways, he's soon joined by MJ, and the two begin talking about what was going on in their lives at the time the letter was written, including recounting for the umpteenth time the events of Gwen's death. To be fair, this last part is actually handled fairly well, as JMS temporarily dials back on the verbiage in order to let the art recreating said death speak for itself. I'll even admit that I found the page where Peter directly remembers the specific moments of Gwen's death to be a little affecting. The usage of the two horizontal panels, with Peter, his face half in shadow, saying above and then, followed by she was gone below, within the middle, Gwen's death, with her all in silhouette. It legitimately helps get across the weight of this moment for Peter. Done catching up any new readers on past events, the comic then returns to the plot, as it turns out the letter only contained that single written page, meaning that Peter and MJ have no more idea than we do what Gwen was apologizing for. Peter also points out that the letter bears a postmark that proves it was sent out within the last week or so, and concludes that this can only mean someone is trying to use the memory of Gwen to mess with him, a fact he does not take kindly. He even goes so far as to say, "All I do know is that something was wrong with Gwen that I never knew about, something so terrible she thought she could never tell me, and now someone's using her pain to try and get to me, and I don't take real well to that. As Spider-Man, there's a lot I've had to swallow and accept and deal with, because that's the nature of the beast. An awful lot. And at the end of the day, I have to let it go, so I can come home to you whole and at least a little sane. But there are some things in my life you just don't touch if you want to walk away with your spine intact. You're one of them. First, foremost, and forever. Ha! This is another." We cut away once again, this time to Peter arriving naturally enough in front of Gwen's grave. Well, I say it's natural, but really, while I can understand visiting the grave of the dead love of your life after getting such a strange and upsetting letter from her, I kind of question the wisdom of doing so in the middle of the night during a raging storm. I would think it would be a bit hard to see the graveyard under such conditions, not to mention the torrential rain and wind getting in the way of the contemplative mood you're apparently trying to establish. I mean, Peter even starts talking to Gwen's gravestone, and all I can think is, boy, I hope he's shouting, otherwise Gwen's not really going to be able to hear him up in heaven over all the noise. Just saying, maybe you could have waited until morning and the storm had passed, but then again, I'm not a gold medal winner in the 300-meter mopin dash like Peter is, so what do I know? Also note that Peter's dressed in civilian clothes as opposed to his Spidey outfit, which rather does raise the question of how Peter got to the graveyard in the first place. I mean, are we supposed to assume that the perennially cash-strapped Peter just caught a cab to the graveyard, which I would remind you all past issues have established is located no small distance from Peter and MJ's then apartment home in the city? Or that he swung out there and then changed clothes, including putting on a bulky, heavy leather jacket in the middle of the pouring rain? It makes even less sense when you take into consideration that JMS himself had previously established that Peter would often use a good swing around the city to clear his head late at night when he's feeling particularly emo even by Parker standards. Now, you may wonder why I'm harping on this little incongruity, but here's the thing. The reason Peter's not in his Spidey costume is to help set up an important plot point for later in the issue. The only catch is that in order to do so, JMS has had to ignore the way Peter normally behaves, not to mention some basic issues of common sense, and I want you to keep that in mind as we go forward, because it will be coming up again repeatedly, I promise. Oh God, somebody help me, please. Save me. Save me from what is to come. Back, however reluctantly, to the comic, where Peter does indeed begin monologuing out loud to Gwen's grave about how much he misses her and wishes she had told him whatever it was that was bothering her. And trust me, Peter, no, you really, really don't. Your life would have been so much better if you'd never found out this particular secret. I know mine would have, at least. Anyways, Peter is gearing up for a truly epic evening of moping in the rain, only to be interrupted by an unseen voice who, I guess, must have a bullhorn or something, since he can apparently be heard easily over the storm. Come to apologize for your sins, Parker? What? I said come to apologize for your... What? I said come to... Look, dude, it's pouring rain, wind everywhere. I just can't hear you. Can you come out and... No, that's not dramatic enough. Leaving aside that little inconsistency, the voice soon begins threatening Peter, who tries to home in on where it's coming from, only to sense another presence. And apparently Peter can tell somehow that both people he may be sensing feel exactly the same. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean in the context of a spider sense that doesn't normally work that way. But never mind yet another little issue like that. Peter and the voice continue to bicker menacingly with one another, until finally the person behind the voice just outright attacks, and is quickly joined by his clearly female partner, all the while going on in the most cliché fashion about how Peter's gonna pay for what he did, and die alone, and blah blah blah. To be fair, what follows is actually a pretty good fight scene, with some excellent staging on the part of Deodato. Peter manages to hold his own for a bit, while also trying to be mindful of not making it too obvious he has superpowers. But between his stated lack of web shooters, which again raises the question of how the hell he got to the damn graveyard in the first place, but I digress, and the lack of buildings to jump away to, he soon takes a hit, a very palpable hit. Yeah, I wish this was Shakespeare. With first blood meaning it's time to flee via a conveniently passing truck. Between how well Peter held his own and the superhuman jump he made to escape, our two mystery figures apparently come to the conclusion that Peter is in fact Spider-Man. Well, they don't actually mention Spidey by name, but yeah, the next issue proves that's what they figured out. Which prompts the male figure to say this is just one more reason to kill Peter, as the issue comes to a close, with the man dramatically removing his mask to reveal he is a complete and total stranger who we've never seen before at any point in the history of Spider-Man comics. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what JMS and Deodato were going for here. I guess unmasked mysterious figure number 1 looks a little in this shot like Peter, thanks to the rain and all that, which in turn I guess could have been intended as a red herring for later, but that's only a guess on my part. Especially since our male villain will look rather different than he does here next time we see his face. Regardless, we should move on, since we still have a lot of ground to cover, and in point of fact, I'm going to condense things down a bit for a while, because among its many, many failings, one of the worst aspects of Sins Past is just how goddamn overly stretched out this whole thing is. This story is 3, maybe 4 issues worth of material stretched out across 6 parts, and it means we are getting padding up the wazoo throughout. And so, we end up with parts 2 and 3 of Sid's Past, which largely consist of a lot of wheel spinning and needlessly drawn out plot developments that ultimately make no sense in the context of the larger story. You'll see what I mean. Issue 2 opens with Peter and MJ discussing the events at the end of the previous issue and discovering imprints from the second page of the letter on the back of the first. Peter and MJ then head down to breakfast with Aunt May, where they discover an envelope that had been left on the porch addressed to Peter. Inside, they find photos of Aunt May and MJ talking to a man and woman respectively, both of whom in the photos have their faces blacked out. I want you to keep in mind for later that it's clear at the time of the photo the woman wasn't covering or blocking her face in any way when talking to MJ. Trust me, it'll be important. Peter also finds a note in the envelope saying, "We can kill them whenever we want." So, add to the list of things to remember the fact that our villains have now threatened to kill 2 innocent women whose only crime is knowing/being related to Peter Parker. There's not even a purpose to this threat like, "Go here or we'll kill them," or "Surrender to us or they're dead." We next follow Peter as he heads off to visit a police detective who was a reoccurring character in JMS's run, and who served as a sort of snarky Commissioner Gordon to Peter's Batman. He was actually a fun character, and one who I was sad to see basically disappear following the end of JMS's run on Amazing. Anyways, Peter figures out an admittedly clever way to have the detective give the letter to forensics to see if they can recover what was written while still preserving his identity, and then swings off randomly into the city. He checks in with MJ to make sure she's safe, and then tries to do the same for Aunt May, only to hear the voice of our male villain mocking Peter about how his big idea of keeping May safe was to move her to the house of her best friend. And for the first and only time, I'm actually in agreement with our mysterious bad guy, because seriously, Petey, that's some weak sauce thinking right there. I get you might not want to go to the police, since that might bring in more scrutiny than your secret ID could handle. But Peter, baby, boobala, you do have friends in the superhero community. If you're that worried, bring May to whatever was the FF's headquarters at the time, or Avengers Mansion. I think this is pre-disassembled. Or hell, even the New Warriors. You've done it before multiple times, under similar circumstances. But, then again, if Peter had done that, then we couldn't have had the lovely page waster that follows, as Peter desperately swings across town to rescue Aunt May before the villain's threatened time limit passes. Which might be a dramatic moment, if not for the fact the book shows us Aunt May is fine, and that in fact all the bad guy has done is pretend to be from the phone company to get access to the line where May is staying. No, really, he's actually physically up on the roof of this house when Peter calls, which raises the question of just how long he's been hanging around up there. I mean, they had to be guessing what Peter was up to at that point, since they couldn't have been following him too closely, or else his spider sense would have gone off. You know, that thing that had been established for over 40 years by this point always alerts Peter when someone is spying on him? Yeah, that. So it must have just been lucky timing our villain showed up when he did, since I think May and her friend might have gotten just a tad suspicious if someone from the phone company hang around on the roof all day doing nothing. Call me Mr. Silly! Also, good thing Aunt May doesn't have a cell phone like MJ and Peter do, or else this whole brilliant plan would have really fallen apart. Oh, and best of all, as our baddie climbs down from the roof slowly, he even mentions to May's friend that he has somewhere to be in about 9 minutes, which is, well, you'll see. You'll see. Okay, not yet. Can't lose it yet. Too soon. Okay. Peter arrives at the building where the bad guys have directed him to go, and which is apparently, judging by the art, located in the ruined post-apocalyptic zone of New York. Fuck if I know. He enters the building only to find an obvious dummy of Aunt May that fools him, despite last issue establishing his spider sense is precise enough to tell when 2 people at least 20 feet away are the same, and then gets blown up all good and nice for his trouble. Peter crawls from the wreckage in fairly bad shape, only to be confronted by our mysterious bad guy, who has apparently not only, somehow, managed the trip across town in less than 9 minutes, but, and this is the best part, but even had time to change into his stupid, overly complicated, yet still generic, grr, look at me, I'm a real badass outfit first! Our baddie begins kicking the living shit out of Peter while continuously yelling about, how does you feel to be abandoned? And how do you like to be alone? And so on, before really laying into Peter while screaming Shatner style, you don't even know me! And no shit, Sherlock, he doesn't know you, because you've been wearing a fucking mask the whole time and just shouting generic-sounding, threatening phrases! Fucking Batman couldn't have deduced your identity at this point! And just when it looks like he's gonna really kill Peter once and for all, who should step in but our female villain, who we learn here is named Sarah, to tell the just revealed to be named Gabriel to stop because, and I quote, we had a deal, remember? This isn't the time. Not yet. I want you all to remember that. That of all the things I've told you to remember so far, that's the most important thing to remember right now. Okay? Remember she said she's the one, Sarah is the one who tells Gabriel not to kill Peter right now because it ain't time. Okay? Okay, that's important. It's Sarah who stops this. Okay? Okay? So, then Gabriel continues to go on and on about how I'm going to kill you, and before I do, I'm going to take away everything you love, and blah, blah, blah. We're going to make sure you know why you deserve it, and blah, blah. It's all shit you've heard before. Peter collapses into unconsciousness, and then has a completely redundant flashback that shows us Peter, MJ, and Gwen Stacy visiting Harry Osborn, and then once again, just an issue later, showing again the death of Gwen Stacy, only with far less effectiveness, and really, it's pretty clear this is just here to waste a few pages, so good for that. And yeah, Peter wakes up, and I love the fact that in a New York within the years immediately following 9/11, apparently an explosion big enough to reduce a fairly large building to rubble has happened, and there are absolutely no emergency responses or police or anything on the scene after what has clearly been at least some time passing. Yeah, no, that's totally believable. Yeah, no, yeah, sure, why not? Peter crawls back to consciousness and says, I don't understand, and boy, he ain't alone. I don't get it either. And then we cut to the last page. Peter is back with his police friend, where the forensic lab has shown incredible, unbelievable speed and managed to recover all the writing on the other page. And here we go. Here we get the big reveal. Are you ready? Are you ready? As it turns out, okay, what Gwen Stacy was apologizing for, okay, what Gwen Stacy was apologizing for was being pregnant and giving birth to two twins, a boy and a girl, named Gabriel and Sarah. And our issue ends with Peter thinking to himself, no, dear God, no, and I'm right there with him. And at this point, you should start to see what I'm talking about when it comes to how needlessly padded out this whole thing is. Think about it. What actually happened in this issue that's important to the plot of the larger story? Answer, Peter learns that Gwen gave birth to twins before she dies, and that said twins are now somehow fully grown up and out to kill him, and also know he's really Spider-Man. All of which could have been accomplished in a couple of pages just by having the twins leave the second part of the letter in the envelope for Peter to read. Then they could sign the little note threatening to kill the two innocent women, love Gabe and Sarah, aka Gwen's kids, and boom. Everything else from the visit to the police, to the bomb, which could have killed innocent people for all you know, or brought all kinds of attention from authorities or other superheroes down on you, and made continuing your little revenge scheme nigh impossible, to the fight afterwards, and so on, could have been cut from the story to no real loss. No, scratch that. It would have been cut to the direct gain of the story, as you will see as we start to dive into the third issue of Sins Past. And yes, I know I haven't really addressed the whole long-lost grown-up children thing, but trust me, I'm coming to it. Oh yes. So, Part 3 of Sins Past. We open with Peter sobbing in disbelief at this whole insane situation, and once again, I'm right there with you, buddy. For the moment, we're on the same page, but it won't last. Oh no, it won't last. Anyways, Peter swings back home, and you'll note FYI that there's no mention of what's going on with Aunt May, nor will there be at any point going forward, despite, a fucking maniac just threatening to kill her and everybody else Peter loves as part of a needlessly complicated plan of revenge for reasons that have yet to be stated. Same with MJ. I mean, I get last issue the threat was just a feint to lure Peter into a trap that really makes no sense in retrospect, considering the twins don't actually want him dead yet. Remember, they want him to suffer first, grrr. So using something as imprecise as, a bomb to beat up Peter? Seems like it could have backfired if he hadn't managed to get just far enough away to survive. But then I'm not an idiotic, murderous maniac hell-bent on revenge. So what do I know? Right, back on point. Peter's no longer worried about the safety of MJ and Aunt May, or anyone else in his life for that matter, because now that the bad guy has made an outright guarantee to kill them before killing Peter, clearly they're now safe because... Anyways, Peter arrives back home, wakes up MJ, and then, despite coming off a 3-year running subplot all about how he needs to not lie to MJ and Aunt May, how they stress being honest with them and not keeping secrets is the key to keeping their relationship as family and wife whole and intact, Peter proceeds to lie and keep secrets from MJ. Because at least he's consistent in his dumbassery. MJ is naturally enough not even remotely fooled for a second. I mean, Peter, it's obvious you've been fucking crying, and we end the scene with her thinking to herself, but I have to respect his secrets, because that's what I do. I keep people's secrets. Gee, I wonder if that's foreshadowing for something really stupid. Spoilers, it is. What follows next is one of the more infamous sequences in this storyline, which is saying something, wherein Peter digs up Gwen's decayed corpse, using a steel pole that was either just sticking in the ground nearby for some reason, or he brought, or... Why isn't he using a shovel? No, really. Wouldn't a shovel make a lot more sense? I mean, the way Gwen's grave is drawn, it appears to be a standard coffin in the ground setup, except the way Peter uses the pole is like the grave is in an above-ground stone tomb. I guess some cross wires between JMS and Donato happened of that, or everyone involved had just stopped caring at this point, which, knowing where this is all going, sounds fairly plausible, truth be told. Anyways, Peter proceeds to desecrate Gwen's grave for science, and then has an admittedly justifiable mini breakdown. Note, he's doing all this in broad daylight, so when he just wants to visit the grave like a normal person would, he goes in the middle of the night during a raging storm. But when he wants to do something illegal to the grave that would get him in all kinds of trouble, he goes during a time when he's most likely to be caught. Yeah, are we sure the legendary Parker bad luck isn't really in fact just a side effect of Peter being a moron? Unknown to Peter, Gabriel is spying on him play grave robber. Spider sense? What's that? And tells Sarah Peter is her furry's worst nightmare, because Gabe is apparently genetically incapable of speaking in anything other than hackneyed cliche. Next, we have a 4-page sequence with MJ at rehearsals for her play, but really this is just padding meant to act as one part comic relief and one part obvious symbolism, and is also so tonally at odds with the rest of this issue, it hurts. I'm all for breaking up the misery, giving the audience a chance to catch its breath and all that, but you have to do it the right way, or else it just serves to take the reader out of the story. Which, admittedly, in the case of this story, wouldn't be the worst thing ever, but you get my point. And now we come to the time in the comic where things start to go truly and completely off the rails. I know. We've gotten some stupid moments up until now, but they pale in comparison to what is about to happen. So Peter is at some lab in a random office building whose significance, if any, escapes me at the moment, testing Gwen's DNA against that of one of the twins. And if you're wondering how and where Peter got DNA of the terrible twosome, he helpfully monologues he got it from the licked stamp and envelope of the first letter the twins sent, and this just further proves how pointless issue 2 really was. Cut out the 4 pages of this issue featuring MJ at rehearsals, slide in the opening couple pages of issue 2 where Peter gets the second letter, alter the timing of a few conversations, and behold, an entire issue seamlessly removed from this story. Which would have been especially helpful in light of what follows. As it turns out, Sarah has shown up at the lab to confront Peter. Apparently, the twins had compiled a list of where he would be most likely to go. Somehow. Later revelations will make this claim dubious at best and just nonsensical at worst, and again, somehow then proceeded to monitor all of them simultaneously. Believable logistics? We don't need no stinking believable logistics. Until Peter finally showed up at one. And no, by the way, once again, spider sense didn't trigger at any of this. Of course it didn't. And why, you may ask, is Sarah there? For what purpose has she come alone to confront Peter? Okay, get this. She's there, I shit you not, she's there to ask Peter to let her kill him. Because, and I quote, he wants to prolong this. He doesn't want to just kill you. He wants to make you suffer. He wants you to see everyone you love die around you. Then, and only then, will he come for you. I just want this over with. Don't you? She just wants this over with. And Gabriel doesn't want to kill him until he suffers. And she just wants this over with. She wants this over with. Despite just last issue, her being the one to stop Gabriel from killing Peter when Gabriel just wanted to kill Peter instead of drawing it out. But no. Now Gabe wants to draw it out, and Sarah just wants to kill Peter. Now, for no reason whatsoever, she wants it over with. This gotta be a joke. No. She just wants this over with. Okay, no. It gets better. I know who you are. I know what you are and what you've done. And if you have even a shred of decency, you'll do the right thing. Yeah? And what's that? You'll let me kill you. Right here. Right now. It's the only way to save the people you care about. Oh, yes, clearly it's the only way. You know, there's no other option like, finding Gabriel, beating the living shit out of him, sending him to jail, and being done with his stupid ass. No, the only way is to let her kill him. Because Gabriel's very patient. He'll wait. Sooner or later, he'll have his opening, and one of them will die. Then another, and holy crap, you two are fucking psychopaths! I mean, yeah, they were clearly not all together there, but no, this is just outright the behavior of a lunatic, an insane, murderous lunatic, which is, again, important to remember for later. And he'll kill them all, unless you let me do this. If you're gone, he has no reason to go after the others. Because clearly, he's behaving in an otherwise logical and rational behavior. Clearly, yeah, sure, they'll be totally safe. You have the gun. What's stopping you? You're too fast. We both know it. You have to accept it willingly if you're man enough to put the lives of others ahead of you for a change. Oh, God. No, blood coming out of... So stupid hurts. Brain hurts. Blood. Too stupid. I need a second. Alright. Yeah, alright. Sorry about that. It was very unprofessional of me, and let's just continue. Right before Peter could respond to one of the stupidest examples of dialogue ever written in the history of comic books, a machine in the lab goes ding. No, really, that's the exact sound effect, a simple ding. And apparently this is enough to set Sarah off, who begins shooting at Peter while diving wildly through the air like she's in a John Woo movie. Because I guess once you admit that shooting at somebody will basically be a pointless gesture, you might as well perform said pointless gesture in style. And indeed, Peter easily dodges the attack, except for when he doesn't and gets shot in the arm as a result. The art wants us to believe it's because he's too close, but again, spider sense, and Peter has dodged at such a range easily plenty of times in the past, but yes, sure, and soon has Sarah pinned to the ground and proceeds to unmask her Scooby-Doo style, only to reveal she looks almost exactly like Gwen Stacy. Oh my God, what a shock. Which you already spoiled on the cover, and even if you hadn't, would have been obvious anyways. because making the daughter look exactly like the mother is as cliche as you can get, and clearly by this point we've established that Sid Past runs on equal parts obvious cliche and terrible ideas. And now, I would like to draw your attention back to the point I made earlier about how in the photo of MJ and Sarah the twins sent to Peter, Sarah is clearly not wearing a mask. Remember that? Do you? Because I do. And now we know that Sarah looks so much like Gwen, it leaves Peter shocked and horrified, which raises the question of, why the fuck didn't Mary Jane freak the fuck out at meeting a random woman on the street who looked almost exactly like her dead friend? No, really, you would think she would have a bit of a response, because if you go back and look at the conversation, she even says she doesn't really remember the woman. She's like, oh yeah, I kind of remember. Like it wasn't a memorable thing at all, seeing the face of your dead friend on a complete stranger. Especially in light of A, information we will learn next issue, and B, Mary Jane and Peter's general history, which relatively recently has involved, clones of people, including Gwen Stacy. So maybe when you're the wife of a superhero who regularly deals with people cloning your dead best friend, and you meet someone who looks almost exactly like your dead best friend, maybe, just maybe, you think that would be a noteworthy occurrence? Or is it just me? Am I the crazy one? Is the comic sane and I'm mad? I can't even tell anymore. What's up? What's down? Somebody tell me. This book, I tell you, this comic, it's gonna break me, people. It's gonna be the end of me. Okay, we're almost done. Let's just wrap this up. So before Peter can get any more details, a shot breaks a nearby window, and as it turns out, it's Gabriel, causing a distraction, which is enough for Sarah to get away, even though when you actually look at the comic, that makes no sense. But again, we have long since left the land of sense behind, so yeah. And instead of, running outside and chasing down Sarah and Gabriel, who must still be nearby, and indeed, as we see, are just standing around on a nearby roof, just, talking and doing nothing, instead of chasing them down and bringing this all to an end, Peter decides to just stand around and do nothing, because, damn it, that's the Parker way! Peter gets the results, and it turns out, as he says helpfully, it's true, it's true, it's true, it's damn true! Cue Kurt Angle's old theme. Wow, that was a deep cut. Anyways, we cut to the rooftop where Sarah and Gabriel are talking, and Gabe's like, what the hell were you doing, Sarah? And she was like, nothing. And he goes, well, okay, I guess that's not suspicious at all. And he reacts and says, oh, I guess you looked really familiar to him. And she agrees, and he says, it just confirms what we already knew. He's our dad. He abandoned us. He killed our mother, and he's gonna pay. But yeah, no, they're not Peter's kids, because as awful as this comic is, it ain't that awful. No, wait, it absolutely is that awful, but yeah, they aren't his kids. So we next cut to Peter once again coming home, and MJ's gotten down the second letter that he webbed to the ceiling somehow. Who cares at this point? And Peter desperately goes, I swear, Gwen, they're not my children. Gwen and I didn't. We never. Okay, that's important. That's important. So Peter and Gwen never slept together. We're going to get this confirmed again next issue, but no. Peter and Gwen never slept together. And MJ goes, I know. You don't have to try to convince me, Peter. I know you're telling the truth. Because I know who the real father of Gwen Stacy's children is. And if you're waiting for the dramatic chipmunk sting after that, you could just go ahead and fucking forget it. This comic does not deserve the dramatic chipmunk. It doesn't deserve anything except a match. Oh my God. And the most unbelievable part is the worst is yet to come. No, really. Compared to what is going to happen in issue 4, the first 3 issues of Sin's Past are a fucking masterpiece of unparalleled genius. That is how awful issue 4 is. Oh God, spare me. So yes, that is the end of part 3 of Sin's Past. And that's also going to be the end of this episode. I'm going to come back in part 2 and we're going to finish this mother up because I have to. I don't want to, but I have to. I must be brave. I must be strong. I can do this. So yeah, come back next time as we take a look at issues 4 through 6 of Sins Past, and I warn you right now, if you've never read this story, if you don't know what's coming, the horror, the sheer horror and awfulness that awaits us in issue 4, there are no words! Well, okay, literally there are words, there are plenty of words, I'm going to have lots of words, I mean, the next episode isn't just going to be all silence, there are words, but metaphorically speaking, there are no words. But there are words. We all clear? There will be words. Okay? Okay? So, yeah. Come back next time as I face the final battle with what I'm just going to go ahead and say is the worst Spider-Man comic ever, and I will totally justify it next time. You will see. In the meantime, stay tuned later this week for a new episode of Blistered Reviews, where I'll be presenting a review of the much-awaited and anticipated Vita release, Persona 4 Dancing All Night. It's going to be a good time with lots of great music and bear puns. All the bear puns. Because, Austin, I love you. Then, next week, Sins Past Part 2, and we're going to get through this together, people. In the meantime, if you want to check out my other stuff, please head on over to unrepentantgeeking.com, where you can see all my other shows. Also, you can find Unrepentant Geeking on iTunes, where I regularly post my audio-only podcast, Ramblings, which you can indeed find on Unrepentant Geeking as well. And finally, Patreon/Unrepentant Geeking is the home of my Patreon, where you can throw a few bucks my way and help me keep things going. Look, people, I'm going to need serious therapy after this, and that doesn't come cheap. Not on my insurance. So, any money you can provide... I say that, but it was money that got me into this, because remember, this is a Patreon request, but look, people, clearly, I will go through hell for $20. You are seeing the lengths I will go to for $20. I have no shame. So yeah, head on over to Patreon and join in on torturing me. Until next time, for Channel Awesome and Unrepentant Geeking, I'm Sean Cronenfeld, wishing you all long days and pleasant nights.